What if I told you that Mercedes could be dominating Formula One, thanks to something that many within the paddock consider illegal? What if Ferrari had also, silently, already won the most important battle? Not on the track, but against the FIA. Because what is happening with the famous engine trick is not a simple technical controversy. It is a war that can completely change the championship. Mercedes has returned to the top, but not as many expected. The 2026 season started with a feeling that already seemed forgotten in Formula One. That of clear, forceful domination, almost uncomfortable for the rest. The W17 was not only fast, it was superior in practically all conditions, and that set off all the alarms from the first moment inside the paddock. But what seemed like simply a sporting comeback soon transformed into something much bigger, much darker. Because while Mercedes imposed its pace on the track, off the track the first suspicions began to appear. The figures didn't add up, the data didn't add up, and above all, the way in which that engine delivered power compared to the rest didn't add up. He was too efficient, too strong in key moments, as if there was something hidden behind that performance. And indeed there was. The 2026 regulation had been designed to avoid precisely this. Limit the compression ratio to 16:1 to maintain balance between manufacturers. But Mercedes didn't break the rule. She interpreted it. They found a detail that went unnoticed by everyone. The measurement had to be done at room temperature. And that's where they built all their advantage. In the garage, the engine was completely legal. But in the race, when everything reached its real temperature, that same engine transformed into something completely different, reaching figures close to 18:1. This is not a simple technical adjustment, it is a difference that changes the game completely. We are talking about a power gain that, although publicly minimized by the team, actually represents a key advantage in acceleration, top speed, and general efficiency. It's the kind of advantage that isn't visible to the naked eye, but that decides races. And this is where Ferrari comes in. Because while some teams hesitated, Ferrari reacted. They immediately understood that they were not facing a simple innovation, but rather an interpretation that broke the balance of the championship. And they were not alone. Honda, Audi, and Red Bull quickly joined together in a joint protest that made it clear that this was not an isolated complaint, but a real threat to the regulation. The pressure on the FIA was brutal even before the season began. Ferrari led a direct offensive seeking to change the way the compression ratio was measured, trying to close that loophole before it was too late. Because they knew something key. If Mercedes managed to homologate that engine without changes, the advantage would be practically frozen for the entire year. But the FIA made a decision that changed everything. He decided to support Mercedes. He declared that if the engine complied with the conditions established by the regulations, that is, when cold, then it was legal. And with that, he gave the green light to one of the most controversial interpretations in recent years. At that moment, it seemed that Mercedes had won. They had the best car, the regulations on their side, and official approval. But what they didn't see coming is that that decision did not close the conflict. What it did was ignite a war. Because Ferrari was not going to stop there. And when Ferrari decides to fight off the track, history has shown us that the consequences can be much greater than anyone imagines. But this is where everything gets complicated, because what seemed like a clear victory for Mercedes was actually the beginning of their biggest problem. The FIA agreed with them, yes. But in doing so it left an open door that Ferrari was quick to exploit. Because when a decision generates so much controversy within the paddock, it's never the end of the story, it's just the beginning. Ferrari understood something that Mercedes completely underestimated. It was not about proving whether the engine was legal or not at that time, but about changing the way the regulations were interpreted going forward. And that's where the real battle began, one much quieter, much more strategic, and much more dangerous. Because while Mercedes celebrated its technical advantage, Ferrari began to move the pieces in the background. The pressure on the FIA did not stop, on the contrary, it increased. The argument changed. It was no longer just a question of numbers, but of the spirit of the regulation. And that is key because in Formula One, when you enter that field, the rules can change at any time. What Ferrari put on the table is devastating. If the objective of the regulations was to limit the real power of the engine in racing conditions, then allowing a measurement only in cold conditions does not make any sense. It is, in essence, allowing legal cheating. And that argument began to gain strength within the FIA and among other teams that already felt harmed. This is where Mercedes begins to lose control of the situation. Because it no longer depends solely on your performance on the track, but on external decisions that can change everything. Every technical meeting, every review of the regulations, every conversation in the offices, becomes a direct threat to your dominance. And most critically, Ferrari is not alone. The alliance with other manufacturers turns this into a collective, constant pressure, impossible to ignore. It is not an isolated complaint, it is a common front that demands changes. And when several Formula One giants push in the same direction, the FIA rarely stands still. This creates a completely unstable scenario. Mercedes is still the fastest but lives in total uncertainty. Because at any time a technical directive can arrive that changes the measurement conditions, that requires the engine to be checked while hot, or even that completely redefines the permitted limit. And if that happens, your entire advantage disappears overnight. This is where Ferrari begins to win the real battle. Not in the lap times, not in the races, but in the field where the future of the championship is really decided, the regulations. They have managed to move the conflict to a point where Mercedes can no longer defend itself solely with technical arguments, because the debate is no longer technical. It is political. And that is the biggest problem for Mercedes. Because you can have the best car in the world, but if the rules change, that car instantly stops being that car. Right now, the German team is in a limit position. They dominate, but they do not control their own destiny. And meanwhile, Ferrari continues to press, waiting for the exact moment when the FIA takes the next step. And this is where everything explodes. Because the situation cannot be sustained for much longer. The accumulated pressure, constant protests, and internal debate within the FIA end up pushing the championship towards an inevitable turning point. What began as a simple interpretation of the rules now threatens to redefine the entire season. Mercedes, who until now had played with an advantage, suddenly finds herself on the ropes. It is no longer just a matter of defending your engine, but of justifying why your solution should remain valid when it clearly breaks the balance that the regulations were trying to protect. And in that scenario, Ferrari achieves exactly what it sought from the beginning, turning a technical innovation into a political problem that is impossible to ignore. The key to this final act is simple but devastating. When the FIA begins to reconsider, Mercedes is no longer in control. Because at the moment when a possible revision of the measurement method is proposed, whether by introducing hot checks or adjusting the interpretation of the regulations, the entire concept of the German engine remains up in the air. And that changes absolutely everything. Ferrari wins because it manages to take the discussion to the ground where it can do the most damage. It does not need to prove that Mercedes did something illegal in the past. It is enough to cause a change that makes its advantage unviable in the present and the future. That's the master move. And here is the hardest blow. If the FIA decides to act, Mercedes would not only lose performance. You would be forced to redesign a fundamental element of your power unit in the middle of the season. Something that is not only extremely complex, but can also affect the reliability, consumption, and general balance of the car. That is, we're not talking about losing a few tenths. We're talking about losing your entire competitive base. Meanwhile, Ferrari is positioned as the great beneficiary of this scenario. Because although on the track they have not been the fastest from the beginning, they have managed to balance the playing field. They have forced a situation where the championship reopens, where the advantage disappears and where everything once again depends on real development, not on a legal loophole. And this leaves a clear conclusion. Mercedes won in engineering, but Ferrari won in the war. Because in modern Formula One, it is not enough to be the smartest in the car. You also have to know how to play outside of it. And on this occasion, Ferrari has shown that it understands that game better than anyone. Right now, the championship is at a critical point. If the FIA intervenes, everything will change. If it does not do so, the controversy will continue to grow until it becomes unsustainable. But in either scenario, Mercedes has already lost something fundamental: stability. And when you lose that in Formula One, the rest usually falls by itself. What we are seeing is not a simple technical controversy. It is a brutal reminder of how Formula One really works. Mercedes found a brilliant solution, an extreme performance that returned them to the top. But in doing so they crossed an invisible line that always ends up having consequences. Because in this sport, it's not enough for something to be legal. It also has to be acceptable to the rest of the ecosystem. Ferrari understood it better than anyone. They knew how to read the situation, accept the initial defeat, and transform that disadvantage into an opportunity. They did not seek to win on the court from the first moment. They sought to change the rules of the game. And that's where championships are really decided, when the differences are so fine. The big lesson from all this is clear. In modern Formula One, the battle is not only fought on the asphalt. It is fought in the offices, in the interpretations of the regulations, and in the ability of a team to influence the decisions that define the sport. Mercedes dominated with engineering, but Ferrari responded with strategy, with pressure, and with a much broader vision of the game. Now the championship is completely open, but with a wound that will not be closed easily. Because even if the FIA makes a final decision, the precedent has already been set. The teams have seen how far they can go, they have understood that there are always cracks in the regulations, and that exploiting them has a price. Mercedes is still fast, it is still dangerous, but it is no longer untouchable. And Ferrari, without needing to be the fastest from the start, has achieved something much more valuable. Balance the fight and regain control of the course of the championship. And in the end, that is the true essence of Formula One. It is not just the one who builds the best car who wins, the one who best understands the entire game wins. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.